Hey friends, my name is Joe Carrell. I'm a Nashville-based producer, mixer, recording engineer, and I love compressors. I still love analog gear. I love software too. I mix heavily with it. You know, I have a ton of it and use a ton of it, but you know, sometimes there's just nothing like real tubes or transformers on a stereo bus or a lead vocal or subgroup masters. You know, it's just a different dimension, and I love it. So I have quite a collection here, some vintage stuff, some new stuff, some really well-known stuff. But there's a lot of pieces that aren't, you know, as well-known that are really, really cool that's in the racks. And one of them I want to talk about today is the TK T Komp. The T Komp came to my attention last year at NAMM. I was walking the hallways and stopped at a booth that had a very well-known vintage tube variable mu compressor, stereo compressor on display. And of course, me, like everyone else, was looking at it, wishful thinking, you know. And a guy walked up in the hallway and knew me and said, he says, "Man, if you like that," he says, "there's probably a really good chance there's something, you know, a little less known that you are really going to flip over." And he highly recommended I try the T Komp. And the way he worded it to me was that it was a solid state variable mu, which had my attention right away because that doesn't happen, right? Like, what even is that? But basically what that means is at its core, it's a VCA compressor, you know, a solid state. But it, much like a variable mu, the ratio isn't fixed. It moves around, you know, so the harder you hit it, it starts at a real soft 2-to-1, and then it just goes all the way up to 20-to-1, depending on what mode you're using. So as you're driving signal into it, it's pushing harder against you, but it's always working, you know, to some degree, and it just sounds, you know, that has a unique thing that other compressors don't do. If you've ever used a Fairchild or a gate stay level or things like that, you know what I'm talking about. They're forgiving and highly musical. And so when I got it in, I put it immediately on a couple different things like vocals, and just fell in love with it, and it never went back. You know, one thing that we know about, older variable mu units is that they're kind of known to be one-trick ponies. You know, maybe they work on vocals or bass guitar or stereo bus or something, but that's like it. They don't work on anything else. One thing I really like about the T Komp is it retains that vintage musicality, but it has a lot of modern features. For example, on the attack time, I have, you know, whereas the Fairchild only had 2 options, I have an attack time of 1 millisecond, lightning fast. I have 5. I have 10, I have 25, and I have also a program dependent, and the release modes are adjustable within those as well. And they range from very fast to progressively slower. And so combined with its forgiving nature that it has anyway with that floating ratio, it's extremely easy to use and just super quick to dial something in. And I love that. And some of these other modern features that the T Komp has that some of our vintage friends don't, that we really come to rely on nowadays, is the high pass filter in the detection circuit, you know, so our kick drums and our bass guitars are not having a negative impact on our stereo bus or our group masters. Things like dry and wet parallel, that's extremely cool. We can get heavy-handed with it and then just dial it back. That's a technique I love to use. And last but not least, and this one's really cool, it's got feedback and feed forward. So as you know, possibly, that feed forward is an entirely different sound. It makes it it's almost like we have 2 different boxes. Feedback is kind of soft and forgiving, and it's that sound that, you know, classic sound that we know and love. But feed forward is really aggressive and can be kind of nasty, and I love it because sometimes that's what we want, so we can switch between those two and have 2 very different sounding units. As much as I love those features, probably my favorite 2 features are the fact that it can be dual mono with its own, each side having its own set of controls. So unlike a lot of vintage units, or even some that's still in production, if I want to have a snare drum on one side and a lead vocal on the other, I can adjust in different, you know, attack times and release times and various things independently of each other. But with one flick of a switch, I can link the 2 sides together, and I can put it across my stereo master. I can put it across subgroups, and both sides move together, which is incredible. And last but not least, it has 2 different, you know, levels of heavy, I would call it. There's a 2-to-1, which is very soft, and that ranges from no compression to 2-to-1. So on our buses, that thing is magic, you know, across a stereo bus, vocal subgroup, things like that. But put that in 20-to-1 to where we can get a lot higher ratio if we want to. That's a lot more useful for tracking and individual sources like snare drums, bass guitars, vocals. So, I mean, versatility is the word of the day. All that to say, about a year ago, I didn't even know that I needed or wanted a solid-state variable mu circuit. Didn't even know it existed. And now that it's in the rack, it's not going anywhere and it's here to stay.